in the gilded splendor of Versailles, where roses bloom with secrets, a charming blackmailer lies dead in a labyrinth, a silver letter opener in his heart. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of deception among the elite. A proud comte, a haunted comtesse, a cunning widow, and a young botanist with a hidden past. As motives of love, greed, and betrayal entwine, a single white rose petal holds the key to a killer's identity. Poirot's little gray cells pierce the shadows of the rose gardens to reveal the truth before another falls. The stage is set, and the curtain rises on a deadly dance of secrets. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Versailles. The autumn light poured through the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, bathing the room in a golden glow that seemed to dance upon the polished surfaces of his meticulously arranged furniture. The little Belgian detective sat at his desk, a model of precision in his tailored suit, his mustache waxed to an impeccable sheen, its tips as sharp as his intellect. Before him lay a small stack of letters, each opened with the care of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. His nimble fingers paused over an envelope of exceptional quality, cream vellum embossed with the gilded crest of the Comte de Rochefort. Poirot's cat-like green eyes flickered with intrigue as he extracted the letter within. The invitation was penned in an elegant hand, requesting Poirot's presence at the Château de Versailles for a grand weekend to celebrate the restoration of its famed rose gardens. The event promised a select gathering of notable figures, fine dining, and a tour of the newly revived gardens, a triumph of horticultural artistry. A charming diversion, perhaps, Poirot murmured to himself, his voice soft but resonant with curiosity. But the gardens of Versailles, they are not merely flowers. They are history, passion, and secrets, n'est-ce pas? Captain Arthur Hastings, sprawled comfortably in a leather armchair across a room, lowered his copy of the Times and raised an eyebrow. His honest, open face, so typically English, betrayed a mix of amusement and skepticism. Versailles, Poirot? Sounds like a rippin' weekend. Roses, champagne, and all that French grandeur. Hardly the sort of place for your usual mysteries, eh? Unless you think someone's going to strangle the gardener over a mispruned shrub. He chuckled, folding the newspaper with a rustle. Poirot's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light that Hastings knew all too well. Mon cher Hastings, you see the surface, always the surface, but where there is beauty, wealth, and the gathering of ambitious hearts, there is always a shadow. The rose. It is lovely, oui, but it conceals thorns that can draw blood. The next afternoon, Poirot and Hastings stepped from their train onto French soil, the air crisp with the scent of autumn leaves. A sleek motor car, sent by the Guy Comte, whisked them through the countryside to Versailles, where the chateau rose like a vision from a fairy tale, its golden stone glowing against the azure sky. The rose gardens, recently restored to their former glory, stretched before the palace in a symphony of color, crimson, blush, amber, and white blooms swaying gently in the breeze. Poirot paused to inhale their fragrance, his expression one of quiet appreciation, though his eyes darted about, noting every detail. The Comte de Rochefort greeted them at the grand entrance, a tall man in his late 40s, his angular face softened by a courteous smile, though his steel-gray eyes held a trace of reserve. His wife, the Comtesse, stood beside him, her beauty striking. Raven hair swept into an elegant chignon, her pale skin contrasting with the deep sapphire of her gown. Her smile, however, was guarded, as if she carried a weight unspoken. "Monsieur Poirot," the Comte said, his voice smooth as velvet, "it is an honor to have you among us. Your reputation precedes you." Poirot bowed, his hand touching his hat. "Monsieur le Comte, Madame, the honor is mine, to see Versailles in such splendor. It stirs the soul." The other guests were already assembling on the terrace, where a light luncheon was laid out beneath a canopy of silk. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, an English widow of considerable wealth and sharper tongue, sipped her wine and surveyed the group with a hawk-like gaze. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pinned beneath a hat adorned with ostrich feathers, and her voice carried the clipped precision of the aristocracy. "Versailles is divine," she declared, "but these modern restorations, they lack the authenticity of the Sun King's era, don't you think?" Monsieur Claude Beaumont, a Parisian art dealer with a flamboyant air, laughed loudly, his silk cravat fluttering as he gestured. "Nonsense, Lady Eleanor. The roses are a masterpiece, thanks to our dear Mademoiselle Laroche." He nodded toward a young woman standing slightly apart, her auburn curls framing a delicate face marked by intense blue eyes. Sophie Laroche, the botanist responsible for the garden's revival, blushed at the attention, her hands fidgeting with a small notebook she clutched like a talisman. "Merci, Monsieur Beaumont," Sophie said softly, her voice tinged with a provincial accent. "The roses are my pride, but the work was a labor of many hands." Hastings, ever the enthusiast, leaned toward Poirot as they joined the group. "Jolly fine setup, Poirot. Look at those blooms. Never seen anything like it. Can't imagine anything sinister in a place like this." Poirot's gaze lingered on the Comtesse, who stood apart, her eyes fixed on the distant labyrinth of the rose gardens. "Hastings," he said quietly, "you see the petals, but I see the roots. They twist, they tangle, and they hide much beneath the surface. This weekend, I suspect, will reveal more than the beauty of roses." As the guests moved toward the gardens for a guided tour, Poirot noted the subtle tensions among them. The Comtesse's hand brushed Beaumont's as they walked, a fleeting gesture that drew a sharp glance from the Comte. Lady Eleanor's eyes followed Sophie with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, while Sophie's own glances toward the Comtesse were quick and nervous. The air, though fragrant with roses, carried a faint undercurrent of unease, like the first note of a storm. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot whispered, his cane tapping lightly on the gravel path. "The stage is set, the players assembled, and I, Hercule Poirot, sense that the curtain is about to rise on a most intriguing drama." Chapter 2. The Body in the Labyrinth. The first evening at the Château de Versailles unfolded in a blaze of opulence, the hall of mirrors aglow with the flicker of chandeliers and the sparkle of crystal goblets. The guests, dressed in their finest, moved through the rituals of dinner with practiced grace, their laughter mingling with the strains of a string quartet. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a perfectly tailored dinner jacket, his mustache a study in symmetry, observed the scene with the keen eye of a hawk. Captain Hastings, seated beside him, savored the coq au vin, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents Poirot detected. The Comtesse de Rochefort's gaze lingered too long on Claude Beaumont, whose flamboyant gestures drew attention like moths to a flame. The Comte, though courteous, gripped his wine glass with a tightness that belied his smile. Sophie Laroche, the young botanist, picked at her food, her eyes darting nervously toward the Comtesse. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, meanwhile, dispensed barbed witticisms with the precision of a fencer, her sharp tongue sparing no one. As the clock struck midnight, the guests began to retire, their footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. Poirot, however, felt a restlessness in his little gray cells. Excusing himself from Hastings, who yawned prodigiously, he slipped into the cool night air, drawn to the rose gardens. The moon cast a silver glow over the meticulously trimmed hedges, and Poirot wandered toward the rose labyrinth, a complex maze of blooms and greenery designed by Sophie Laroche herself. Its paths twisted like the threads of a mystery, and Poirot, ever methodical, paced its outer edges, his cane tapping softly on the gravel. "A labyrinth," he murmured, "is a place of secrets where one may hide, or be hidden." The peace of the night was shattered at dawn by a piercing scream that cut through the chateau like a shard of glass. Poirot, already awake and sipping his morning tisane, sprang to his feet with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious demeanor. Hastings, bleary-eyed and still in his dressing gown, stumbled after him as they hurried toward the gardens, where a small crowd of guests and staff had gathered at the heart of the labyrinth. The air was thick with the scent of roses, but a darker note, metallic and sharp, hung beneath it. At the center of the labyrinth, where the paths converged on a small circular clearing, lay Claude Beaumont, dead. His body sprawled across a bed of crimson roses, their petals stained darker by blood. A silver letter opener, its handle embossed with the Rochefort crest, protruded from his chest, glinting in the early light. His face, frozen in a rictus of shock, stared upward, as if the stars had betrayed him. The guests stood frozen, their faces a gallery of horror and suspicion. The Comtesse clutched her shawl, her lips trembling. The Comte's face was a mask of stone. Sophie Laroche's hands shook as she stared at the body, and Lady Eleanor, for once, held her tongue, though her eyes gleamed with calculation. Inspecteur Lefebvre, the local gendarme, arrived with a clatter of boots, his broad frame and brusque manner cutting through the stunned silence. A man of middle years, with a weathered face and a mustache that lacked Poirot's elegance, he surveyed the scene with a scowl. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his tone clipped, "this is a French matter. Your presence is noted, but I will handle the investigation." Poirot bowed, his expression one of impeccable courtesy. "Naturellement, Inspecteur. I am but a humble guest, yet if I may, I would observe. The little gray cells, they are restless in the presence of such a tragedy." Lefebvre grunted, his eyes narrowing, but he waved a hand, allowing Poirot to approach the body. The detective knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the scene without touching. The letter opener had pierced Beaumont's heart cleanly, suggesting a single forceful blow. The surrounding grass, still damp with morning dew, bore no footprints save those of the guests who had just arrived. The roses, crushed beneath Beaumont's weight, released their fragrance, a cruel contrast to the grim tableau. Poirot's gaze lingered on the letter opener. "Curieux," he said softly. "A weapon so personal, so precise, yet left for all to see." Hastings, hovering at his elbow, whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, who'd do this? Beaumont was a bit of a bounder, all flash and charm, but to stab him like this, in a maze, of all places." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The labyrinth, mon ami, is not merely a place. It is a statement. The killer chose it with care, to confuse or to conceal. But why here, among the roses? Lefebvre's men cordoned off the area, and the guests were ushered back to the chateau, their murmurs a low hum of fear and speculation. Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the labyrinth's paths. He noted the precision of the hedges, the symmetry of the blooms, and the absence of any stray debris. No struggle, he mused. Beaumont did not fight. He knew his killer, perhaps trusted them. Back in the chateau's salon, the atmosphere was taut as a violin string. The Comte, his face pale but composed, confirmed the letter opener was his, kept in a locked drawer in his study. "It was a gift from my father," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I last saw it yesterday morning." The Comtesse, seated beside him, twisted a lace handkerchief in her hands, her dark eyes haunted. "Claude was a friend," she said softly. "I cannot believe this." Lady Eleanor, perched on a velvet settee, raised an eyebrow. "A friend, my dear? He was rather free with his friendships, wasn't he? Always whispering in corners. That man." Sophie Laroche, standing by a window, flinched at the words. "He was interested in my work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We spoke yesterday about the roses, nothing more." Poirot, standing by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, observed each face in turn. "Monsieur Beaumont," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "was a man of many acquaintances, yet few true friends, I suspect. Tell me, who last saw him alive?" A heavy silence fell. The Comtesse admitted to seeing Beaumont in the Hall of Mirrors after dinner, discussing a painting he wished to sell her. The Comte said he had retired early to his study. Sophie claimed to have walked the gardens alone, checking her roses under the moonlight. Lady Eleanor, with a sly smile, said she had gone to bed. Unlike some who prefer midnight intrigues, Hastings, pulling Poirot aside as the group dispersed, muttered, "It's a rum business, Poirot. That letter opener points to the Comte, doesn't it? And why the labyrinth? Seems a deuced risky spot for a murder." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Risky, Hastings? Or deliberate? The labyrinth hides, but it also reveals. The killer wished us to find the body, to see the letter opener. This is a crime of calculation, and we must look beyond the obvious to find its truth." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the rose gardens, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of motive and opportunity. The labyrinth, with its twists and turns, was a fitting stage for a murder that promised to unravel the secrets of Versailles' gilded guests. Chapter 3. The Suspects and Their Secrets. The grand salon of the Château de Versailles, with its gilded moldings and towering windows, seemed to close in on the gathered guests, the weight of Claude Beaumont's murder pressing upon them like a storm cloud. The morning light filtered through heavy drapes, casting a muted glow over the faces of the Comte de Rochefort, his wife, Lady Eleanor Vaughan, and Sophie Laroche, each seated in a posture of strained composure. Hercule Poirot stood near the marble fireplace, his small, immaculate figure commanding the room despite its grandeur. His green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, moved from one suspect to another, reading the flickers of unease that betrayed their polished exteriors. Captain Hastings, perched on the edge of a brocade chair, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his honest face clouded with confusion. Inspecteur Lefebvre, his brusqueness tempered by the gravity of the situation, had retreated to oversee his men's search of the chateau, leaving Poirot to conduct what he called a little conversation. The detective's voice, precise and measured, broke the tense silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "a man is dead, struck down in the heart of the labyrinth, and the truth lies not in the roses, but in the hearts of those who walked among them. I ask you to speak freely. For the little gray cells, they listen." The Comte, his angular face, pale but resolute, spoke first. "The letter opener was mine, Monsieur Poirot. As I said, it was kept in my study, under lock and key. I cannot explain how it came to be in the labyrinth." His voice held a note of controlled frustration, and his fingers tightened briefly on the arm of his chair. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "And you, Monsieur le Comte, where were you last night, after the dinner in the Hall of Mirrors?" "I retired to my study," the Comte replied, his gaze steady. "I had correspondence to attend to. I was alone." "No witnesses, then?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were unyielding. The Comte's jaw tightened. "None." The Comtesse, seated beside her husband, seemed to shrink into her chair, her raven hair framing a face drained of color. Her hands twisted a silk shawl, its fringes fraying under her nervous fingers. "Claude, Monsieur Beaumont, was a friend from my days in Paris," she said softly, her voice trembling. "We met at salons years ago. He was charming, but nothing more." Her eyes darted to her husband, then away. Lady Eleanor Vaughan, lounging with studied nonchalance on a velvet divan, let out a soft, derisive laugh. "Charming, my dear Comtesse. Beaumont was a serpent in silk, always coiling around someone's secrets. I saw him whispering to you last night, and it wasn't about art, I'd wager." Her auburn hair gleamed under her feathered hat, and her eyes sparkled with malice. The Comtesse flushed, her lips parting in protest, but Poirot raised a hand. "Madame Vaughan, you observe much. Perhaps you observed Monsieur Beaumont's movements after dinner?" Lady Eleanor shrugged, her smile sharp. "I went to my room, Monsieur Poirot. I'm not one for midnight strolls in mazes, but I'd wager Beaumont crossed someone with less patience than I." Poirot turned to Sophie Laroche, who stood by a window, her small frame rigid, her blue eyes wide with anxiety. "Mademoiselle Laroche, you knew Monsieur Beaumont through your work, oui? Tell me of your conversation with him yesterday." Sophie's hands clutched her notebook, its pages creased from her grip. He wanted to buy the formula for my hybrid roses," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're unique, a blend I developed over years. He offered a fortune, but I refused. It's my legacy, not a commodity." Her cheeks flushed and she looked down, as if ashamed of her vehemence. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this refusal? It was amicable?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "He was persistent, but I left him in the garden. That was all." Hastings, unable to contain himself, leaned toward Poirot as the group fell silent. "Bit of a tangle, eh, Poirot? That letter opener points to the Comte, but Sophie's got motive, and the Comtesse, well, she's hiding something, isn't she?" Poirot's lips curved faintly. "Patience, Hastings. The truth is like a tapestry. Each thread must be examined before the pattern emerges." He paced the room, his polished shoes silent on the parquet floor, and addressed the group again. "Monsieur Beaumont, it seems, was a man who collected secrets. I have learned he sought a loan from you, Monsieur le Comte, and hinted at information he could sell. True?" The Comte's face darkened, his voice low. He approached me, yes. He claimed to know things that could embarrass my family. I refused him. I thought it a bluff. Poirot's gaze shifted to the Comtesse. And you, madame? Did he speak of these things to you? Her breath caught, and for a moment her composure faltered. He mentioned old letters from my youth, foolish things written before my marriage. He said he could make them public unless I paid him. Her voice broke, and she looked away, her hands trembling. The Comte's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with shock. You never told me this. Lady Eleanor's smile widened, predatory. Oh, my dear Comte, Paris was full of whispers about your wife and Beaumont. Those letters must be quite the read. Poirot's voice cut through the tension, smooth as a blade. Madame Vaughan, your knowledge of gossip is formidable, yet you claim to have seen nothing last night. Curious, for one so observant. Lady Eleanor's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. I observe what matters, Monsieur Poirot. Beaumont was trouble, and trouble finds its end. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. Trouble, oui. But who ended it? That is the question. As the guests were dismissed, Poirot lingered, his mind a whirl of impressions. The Comte's pride, the Comtesse's fear, Sophie's defensiveness, Lady Eleanor's malice. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but none yet fit. He turned to Hastings, who was scribbling notes in a small pad, his brow furrowed. What do you make of it, Poirot? The Comte's got the weapon, the Comtesse has the secret, and Sophie's got the motive. But Lady Eleanor, she's too smug, don't you think? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Smug, Hastings? Perhaps, but the smug are often the most blind. The labyrinth was chosen for a reason, not just to hide, but to reveal. We must look closer, mon ami, at the secrets each holds, and how they intertwine. As they left the salon, the rose gardens beyond the windows glowed under the midday sun, their beauty a stark contrast to the dark currents running beneath the chateau's gilded surface. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, sifting through the lies and half-truths, seeking the thread that would unravel the mystery of Claude Beaumont's death. Chapter 4. The Missing Alibi. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Château de Versailles, its golden rays doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the guests following Claude Beaumont's murder. The rose gardens, so vibrant and inviting the previous day, now seemed to whisper of secrets, their blooms heavy with the weight of the tragedy. Hercule Poirot, his small figure impeccable in a charcoal suit, stood on the terrace overlooking the labyrinth, his cane resting lightly in his gloved hand. His green eyes, ever alert, scanned the paths below, as if the hedges themselves might yield a clue. Captain Hastings, at his side, adjusted his tie nervously, his usual cheer dampened by the grim events. "Dash it all, Poirot," Hastings muttered, glancing toward the chateau where Inspecteur Lefebvre's men were still combing through rooms and questioning staff. "This business is getting murkier by the hour. That letter opener screams the Comte's involvement, but everyone's acting shifty. What's your take?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon cher Hastings, the obvious is rarely the truth. The letter opener. It is a bold gesture, no? Too bold, perhaps. We must seek the truth not in what is shown, but in what is hidden." Inside the chateau, Inspecteur Lefebvre had set up a temporary headquarters in a small study, its walls lined with leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced aristocrats. His men had found no trace of the letter-opener's journey from the Comte's desk to the labyrinth, nor any signs of forced entry into the study. The lock, the Comte insisted, had been intact that morning. Lefebvre, his weathered face set in a scowl, shared this with Poirot, though his tone was grudging. No footprints, no witnesses, no struggle. This killer is a ghost, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot inclined his head. A ghost, Inspector? No. A ghost leaves no letter opener. This killer is flesh and blood, and very clever. Determined to test the alibis of the night before, Poirot requested private interviews with each suspect, conducted in a quiet parlor adorned with tapestries of pastoral scenes. The Comte de Rochefort was first, his tall frame rigid as he sat across from Poirot, his hands clasped tightly. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was in my study after dinner, working until well past midnight. I saw no one, and no one saw me." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And this letter opener, monsieur, so distinctive with your family, crest, when did you last see it?" "Yesterday morning," the Comte replied. "I used it to open a letter from my solicitor. It was in its place when I left the study." "Curieux," Poirot murmured. "A locked drawer, yet the weapon finds its way to the labyrinth. Tell me, did Monsieur Beaumont ever visit your study?" The Comte hesitated, then shook his head. "Not to my knowledge. He was a guest, not a confidant." Next came the Comtesse, her beauty marred by the strain of the morning's events. Her sapphire gown had been replaced by a simpler dress of dove gray, and her hands trembled as she sat, avoiding Poirot's gaze. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "you have admitted to knowing Monsieur Beaumont in Paris. Last night, he was seen leaving your private sitting room after dinner. What was the nature of this visit?" Her cheeks flushed, and she twisted a ring on her finger. "He came to discuss a painting he wished to sell, a minor work, nothing more. We spoke briefly, and he left." Her voice wavered, and she looked away, toward the window where the roses bloomed beyond. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A painting, madame? Yet others suggest a closer connection. Letters, perhaps, from a time before your marriage?" The Comtesse's breath caught, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of tears. "That was years ago," she whispered. "A foolish girl's indiscretions. Claude, he reminded me of them, but it was nothing." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, madame. The truth, it is like a delicate flower. It requires care to bloom." Sophie Laroche followed, her auburn curls disheveled, her notebook clutched like a shield. She sat stiffly, her blue eyes wide with apprehension. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "you walked the gardens last night alone to check your roses. A curious hour for such a task, no?" Sophie's fingers tightened on her notebook. "The moonlight helps me see the bloom's health," she said, her voice defensive. "Some roses are sensitive to night air. I was in the outer gardens, not the labyrinth." "And Monsieur Beaumont?" Poirot pressed. "Did you see him after your argument yesterday?" She shook her head vehemently. "No. I avoided him after he pressed me about the formula. I swear it." Lady Eleanor Vaughan was the last, her posture languid, but her eyes sharp as she reclined in an armchair, a cigarette holder dangling from her fingers. "Really, Monsieur Poirot," she drawled, "this is all rather tedious. I was in my room, reading, as I told you. I have no interest in skulking about mazes at midnight. Poirot's smile was polite but probing. Madame, you are a woman of keen observation, yet you claim to have seen nothing, heard nothing, of Monsieur Beaumont's movements? Precisely, she replied, exhaling a plume of smoke. I'm not a nursemaid, watching everyone's comings and goings. Beaumont was a nuisance, and someone clearly agreed. As the interviews concluded, Poirot and Hastings walked the gravel paths of the gardens, the detective's mind clearly at work. Hastings, his brow furrowed, ventured, "It's a puzzle, Poirot. The Comte's got no alibi, and that letter opener's his. The Comtesse is hiding something about Beaumont. Sophie's story about the roses sounds thin, and Lady Eleanor's too blasted smug to be innocent. Could it be an outsider? A servant, maybe?" Poirot shook his head, his cane tapping rhythmically. "Non, Hastings. This is a crime of intimacy. The letter opener, the labyrinth. These are choices, not accidents. The killer knew Beaumont's habits, his secrets. And the labyrinth, it is a stage, chosen to send a message." Hastings frowned. "A message? What kind?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The alibis, they are missing or weak, but it is the why that matters. Why kill in such a place with such a weapon? The answer lies in the hearts of our suspects, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." As they returned to the chateau, the roses swayed in the breeze, their beauty a silent witness to the dark drama unfolding within the gilded walls of Versailles. The little gray cells were already weaving the threads of suspicion, ready to unravel the truth hidden among the thorns. Chapter 5. The Clue in the Roses. The late afternoon sun bathed the rose gardens of Versailles in a warm amber glow. Yet the air carried a chill that seemed to seep from the very stones of the chateau. Hercule Poirot, his small, meticulous figure, a stark contrast to the sprawling grandeur around him, paced the gravel paths leading to the labyrinth, his cane leaving precise impressions in the earth. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the surroundings, as if the roses themselves might whisper the truth of Claude Beaumont's murder. Captain Hastings trailed behind, his face a mixture of awe at the garden's beauty and frustration at the case's complexity. "Dash it, Poirot," Hastings said, tugging at his collar. "We've got a locked study, a missing alibi for nearly everyone, and a letter opener that points straight to the Comte. But it's too neat, isn't it? Almost as if someone wanted to pin it on him." Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint smile. "Précisément, Hastings. The obvious is a trap, laid to distract. But the little gray cells, they see beyond the surface. Come, let us revisit the scene of the crime." They entered the rose labyrinth, its hedges towering like silent sentinels, their leaves glistening with the remnants of morning dew. At the heart of the maze, where Beaumont's body had been found, the ground was still marked by the gendarme's cordon, though the body had been removed. The crimson roses, some crushed underfoot, bore faint traces of blood, a grim reminder of the violence that had shattered the garden's tranquility. Poirot knelt, his gloved hands hovering over the scene, his eyes darting across the earth. Near the base of a rosebush, half hidden by a cluster of petals, he spotted something. A single, torn petal, not crimson like its neighbors, but a pure, ghostly white. He plucked it with care, holding it to the light. "Curieux," he murmured, turning the petal between his fingers. "This is no ordinary rose. It does not belong to the labyrinth's design." Hastings peered over his shoulder, frowning. "Just a petal, Poirot. Could have been carried by the wind, couldn't it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The wind, Hastings?" "No. The wind does not place a petal so precisely in a place of death. This is a clue, deliberate or accidental, and we must understand its meaning." Leaving the labyrinth, Poirot sought out Sophie Laroche, finding her in the chateau's conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with exotic plants and the faint hum of bees. She stood over a workbench, her auburn curls falling over a notebook filled with sketches of roses. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a sprig of blooms, and her blue eyes widened at Poirot's approach. "Mademoiselle Laroche," Poirot began, his voice gentle but firm. "This petal." He held up the white fragment. "It is from a rose not found in the labyrinth. Can you identify it?" Sophie's face paled, her fingers tightening on her notebook. It's from my hybrid, the Blanche Étoile," she said, her voice barely audible. "I developed it in my private greenhouse, beyond the main gardens. Only I have access to it. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I was not in the labyrinth last night." Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "And yet, this petal was found where Monsieur Beaumont died. How, mademoiselle, do you explain this?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't. Someone must have taken it from the greenhouse. I keep it locked, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her shoulders trembling. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Merci, mademoiselle. We shall speak again." Later, in Beaumont's guest room, Poirot and Hastings conducted a discreet search, permitted by a grudging Inspecteur Lefebvre. The room was a study in opulence, silk drapes, a four-poster bed, and a desk littered with papers. Among them, Poirot found a small leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a blotter. Its pages were filled with cryptic notes, sums owed to Beaumont by the Comte, marked with terse comments like Rochefort, 10,000 francs, overdue, and vague references to her secret and letters worth a fortune. One entry caught Poirot's eye. "SL, Rose Formula, priceless. She'll pay to keep it." Hastings, reading over his shoulder, whistled softly. "Good Lord, Poirot. Beaumont was a blackmailer, wasn't he? The Comte, the Comtesse, and now Sophie. Sounds like he had dirt on everyone." Poirot's fingers traced the words. "Oui, Hastings. A man who trades in secrets is a man who courts death. But this petal, it is not mentioned here. It is a piece that does not yet fit." That evening, as the guests dined in subdued silence, Lady Eleanor Vaughan cornered Poirot in the corridor, her cigarette holder glinting in the lamplight. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "The Comtesse and Beaumont, there's history there. Letters, scandalous ones, from her days as a debutante. Ask her about them. She'll crack." Poirot's smile was polite, but guarded. "Madame, you are most forthcoming. Yet I wonder, why do you point so eagerly to the Comtesse? What do you hide behind your own sharp tongue?" Lady Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound. "Hide? I'm an open book, monsieur, but some books have more interesting chapters than others." As she sauntered away, Hastings joined Poirot, his brow furrowed. "She's a piece of work, that one. Do you think she's trying to throw us off? Or is the Comtesse really the key?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Lady Eleanor sees much, but she reveals only what suits her. The petal, the notebook, the letters, they are threads in a web, Hastings. But the spider, who is the spider? Back in his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, the white petal before him, its edges curling like a question mark. He closed his eyes, his mind a whirl of images, the labyrinth's symmetry, Beaumont's lifeless form, the Comte's strained dignity, the Comtesse's haunted eyes, Sophie's trembling hands, Lady Eleanor's sly smile. "The rose?" he murmured. "It is more than a clue. It is a symbol of beauty, of secrecy, of betrayal. But whose betrayal?" Hastings, sipping a brandy, ventured, "It's got to be Sophie, hasn't it? That petal's from her greenhouse. She's hiding something about those roses." Poirot shook his head. "Perhaps, Hastings, but the petal was placed, not dropped. It is a message or a mistake. And I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in mistakes where murder is concerned." As the chateau settled into an uneasy night, the roses outside stood silent, their beauty a facade for the dark truths they concealed. The little gray cells were at work, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that grew ever more intricate with each revelation. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The evening shadows lengthened across the Château de Versailles, cloaking the rose gardens in a veil of twilight that seemed to deepen the unease within the gilded walls. The grand salon, where the guests had gathered once more, was a study in tension, its opulent chandeliers casting a cold light on faces etched with suspicion and fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure radiating authority, his green eyes sharp as they surveyed the assembled company. The Comte de Rochefort, his jaw set with quiet resolve. The Comtesse, her beauty marred by a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Sophie Laroche, clutching, her notebook like a lifeline, and Lady Eleanor Vaughan, her lips curled in a faint, mocking smile. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his honest face a mixture of anticipation and bewilderment, his notebook open but forgotten in his hand. Inspecteur Lefebvre, his weathered features set in a scowl, had reluctantly agreed to Poirot's request for this gathering, though he hovered near the fireplace, his arms crossed as if to assert his authority. "Monsieur Poirot," he said gruffly, "I hope this is not some theatrical display. My men are working, and time is short." Poirot's mustache twitched, his voice calm but commanding. "Inspector, the truth requires a stage, and here, among the players, we shall find it. Mesdames et messieurs, a man is dead, and the threads of his death are woven through your secrets. Let us unravel them." He held up the white rose petal, its delicate form stark against his gloved hand. "This petal, found beside Monsieur Beaumont's body, comes from the Blanche Étoile, a hybrid grown only in Mademoiselle Laroche's private greenhouse. How, I ask, did it come to rest in the labyrinth?" Sophie's face drained of color, her voice trembling. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was not there. Someone must have taken it from my greenhouse. The lock. It could have been forced." Poirot's gaze was steady, unyielding. "Possible, mademoiselle, but unlikely. The greenhouse shows no signs of tampering. No, this petal was placed deliberately to point to you, or away from another." The Comte shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? That one of us planted this clue?" Poirot turned to the Comtesse, his voice softening. "Madame, you have admitted to a past with Monsieur Beaumont, and to his blackmail. Letters from your youth. Oui? Letters that could ruin your reputation. Tell me, Did he press you for more than money last night?" The Comtesse's hands twisted her shawl, her voice barely above a whisper. "He came to my sitting room after dinner. He demanded more money, said the letters would destroy my marriage if I refused. I told him I had nothing left to give." Her eyes, brimming with tears, met her husband's, and the Comte's face softened, though his fists clenched. "You never told me," the Comte said, his voice low, wounded. "Why did you keep this from me?" Before she could answer, Lady Eleanor's sharp laugh cut through the room. "Oh, come now, Rochefort. Your wife's past with Beaumont was hardly a secret in Paris. Those letters? I'd wager they're spicy enough to burn this chateau down. Perhaps you found out, slipped into the labyrinth, and ended him with your own letter opener." The Comte's face reddened, his voice rising. "That's preposterous. I would never—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Monsieur le Comte, your anger is noted, but let us examine the facts. Your letter opener, taken from a locked drawer, was found in Beaumont's heart. You claim to have been in your study, alone, with no witnesses. Convenient, non?" The Comte's eyes blazed. "I am no murderer, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor, his tone deceptively mild. "And you, Madame Vaughan, are quick to accuse. Yet your own alibi is as thin as gossamer. You claim to have been in your room, reading, but no one saw you. You, who know so much of others' secrets. What do you conceal?" Lady Eleanor's smile faltered, her cigarette holder pausing mid-air. "I conceal nothing, monsieur. I merely observe what others are too blind to see." Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping the parquet floor. "Beaumont was a blackmailer, oui. He held secrets over the Comtesse, pressed the Comte for money, and sought Mademoiselle Laroche's rose formula. But the labyrinth, why there? It is a place of confusion, yet the murder was precise. No struggle, no footprints in the dew. The killer knew Beaumont's habits, his movements. And the petal, it is a clue that points, but to whom? Sophie's voice broke the silence, desperate. "It wasn't me. I refused Beaumont, yes, but I didn't kill him. Someone is trying to frame me." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Mademoiselle, the truth will protect you, but only if it is whole. Did Beaumont know something else about your roses? A secret worth killing for?" Sophie shook her head, tears spilling. "No, I swear. My work is my own." Hastings, unable to stay silent, leaned toward Poirot. "It's a devil of a mess, Poirot. The Comtesse's letters, the Comte's weapon, Sophie's petal. Everyone's got a reason to want Beaumont dead. But that labyrinth, it's like the killer wanted to make a spectacle." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "A spectacle, Hastings, or a misdirection. The labyrinth is a symbol of secrets, of deception. The killer chose it to hide their intent or to reveal another's guilt." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with unease, Poirot lingered by the window, gazing at the rose gardens below. The Blanche Étoile petal, the blackmail notes, the letter opener. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Lefebvre approached, his scowl deepening. "You stir them up, Monsieur Poirot, but where is your proof?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Proof, Inspecteur, is like a rosebud. It opens in its own time. But the little gray cells, they are close to the truth." Alone with Hastings, Poirot sat, his fingers steepled. "We have motives, Hastings, but motives are not enough. The killer is among us, playing a game of shadows. Tomorrow, we shall shine a light." The chateau settled into a restless night, the roses outside swaying in the breeze, their beauty a silent witness to the secrets that festered within. Poirot's mind, relentless and precise, churned through the clues, seeking the thread that would bind the murderer to their crime. Chapter 7. The Little Grey Cells at Work. The night had draped the Château de Versailles in a mantle of stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the rose gardens below. Hercule Poirot sat alone in his guest room, a small but elegantly appointed chamber with silk wallpaper and a view of the moonlit labyrinth. A single lamp cast a warm glow over his desk, where the white Blanche Étoile petal lay like a silent accusation. His green eyes, sharp and contemplative, stared at it as if it might speak, while his fingers, steepled in thought, betrayed the restless activity of his mind. The little grey cells, as he so often called them, were weaving together the threads of Claude Beaumont's murder, the letter opener, the blackmail notes, the labyrinth, and the enigmatic petal. Captain Hastings, sprawled in an armchair with a glass of brandy, broke the silence. "It's a proper tangle, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with exasperation. "The Comte's letter opener, the Comtesse's letters, Sophie's petal, and Lady Eleanor stirring the pot like some blasted witch. I'd wager it's the Comte, defending his honor, you know, after finding out about Beaumont's blackmail. But that labyrinth business, it's so theatrical." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Theatrical, Hastings?" "Oui, that is the word. The labyrinth is a stage, chosen with care. But for whom? To accuse, to confuse, or to conceal? The Comte's honor is a motive, but motives, mon ami, are like roses. They bloom in many colors." He rose, pacing the room with measured steps, his cane resting unused against the desk. "Consider the facts. Beaumont, a blackmailer, held secrets over the Comtesse, letters from her youth. He pressed the Comte for money, threatening to expose these secrets. He coveted Mademoiselle Laroche's rose formula, perhaps knowing it was not entirely her own. And Lady Eleanor, she watches, she speaks, but she reveals nothing of herself. Each has a reason to wish Beaumont dead, yet the method, the labyrinth, the letter opener, the petal, tells a story of its own." Hastings frowned, swirling his brandy. "That petal's the key, isn't it? It's from Sophie's greenhouse, and she's the only one with access. But why leave it there? To frame herself? Doesn't make sense." Poirot paused, his eyes gleaming. "Précisément, Hastings. It does not make sense, unless it was placed to point elsewhere. The petal is no accident. It was left to be found, like the letter opener, bold and deliberate. The killer wishes us to see something, or to look away from something else." He returned to the desk, picking up the petal and turning it in the light. "The Blanche Étoile is Mademoiselle Laroche's creation, her pride. Yet Beaumont's notebook suggests he knew a secret about her roses, perhaps that her formula was stolen or shared. If so, he held power over her, as he did over the Comtesse. But the labyrinth, why there? It is a place of symmetry, yet it hides chaos. The killer walked its paths without leaving a trace, struck without a struggle. This requires knowledge, intimacy, precision." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You're saying it's someone who knew Beaumont well? The Comtesse, maybe? Those letters sound like a sore spot." Poirot shook his head. The Comtesse, she is afraid, but her fear is of exposure, not of guilt. The Comte, his pride is wounded, but he is too direct for such a subtle crime. Lady Eleanor, she knows too much, yet her alibi is as empty as the others. And Sophie, her petal, her roses, her passion, they are at the heart of this. He sat again, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the desk. The little gray cells, they see a pattern. The letter opener accuses the Comte, the petal accuses Sophie, the letters accuse the Comtesse. But the truth, it is not in accusation, it is in intention. Why the labyrinth? Why no footprints? Why the petal? These are not mistakes, Hastings, they are choices. Hastings rubbed his temples. Choices? You mean the killer planned it all? The weapon, the place, even that blasted petal? Oui, Poirot said softly. This is a crime of calculation, designed to mislead. The killer is among us, hiding in plain sight, using the labyrinth as both shield and spotlight. Tomorrow we shall gather them again, and the truth will bloom. The next morning, Poirot requested a final meeting in the rose gardens, at the entrance to the labyrinth. Inspecteur Lefebvre, his patience wearing thin, agreed, though his scowl suggested he doubted Poirot's methods. The guests assembled under a sky heavy with clouds, their faces a gallery of apprehension. The Comte stood tall, his eyes guarded. The Comtesse clutched her husband's arm, her face pale. Sophie's hands trembled as she held her notebook, and Lady Eleanor's smile was as sharp as ever, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot stood before the labyrinth, his voice clear and commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, we stand at the threshold of truth. Claude Beaumont was killed not for love, nor for money alone, but for control. His secrets gave him power, but they also made him enemies. The labyrinth, the letter opener, the petal, these are not random. They are the signature of a mind that seeks to manipulate, to deceive. He paused, his gaze sweeping the group. Tomorrow we shall return here, and I, Hercule Poirot, will name the killer. For now, reflect on your secrets, for they are no longer safe. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps crunching on the gravel, Hastings pulled Poirot aside. You're close, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. But who is it? Sophie? The Comte? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Patience, Hastings. The little gray cells are nearly done. The truth is like a rose. It blooms only when the time is right. The chateau loomed behind them, its golden facade a silent witness to the drama unfolding in its shadow. The roses, vibrant and fragrant, stood as sentinels, their beauty hiding the thorns of deceit that Poirot was determined to uncover. The stage was set, the players in place, and the final act was near. Chapter 8. The Unveiling. The morning sun broke through the heavy clouds that had lingered over Versailles, casting a golden light across the rose gardens and bathing the labyrinth in a deceptive glow of serenity. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet fragrance of blooms that seemed untouched by the darkness of Claude Beaumont's murder. Hercule Poirot stood at the entrance to the labyrinth, his small figure impeccable in a tailored suit, his mustache a perfect arc of precision. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the gathered guests. The Comte de Rochefort, his face a mask of restrained dignity. The Comtesse, her beauty fragile under the strain of secrets. Sophie Laroche, clutching her notebook with trembling hands, and Lady Eleanor Vaughan, her sharp smile faltering under Poirot's scrutiny. Captain Hastings stood beside him, his honest face tense with anticipation, while Inspecteur Lefebvre loomed nearby, his weathered features set in a scowl of impatience. Poirot's voice, clear and commanding, cut through the morning stillness. Mesdames et messieurs, we stand at the heart of a mystery where beauty conceals betrayal. Claude Beaumont was struck down in this labyrinth, his life ended by a letter opener bearing the Rochefort crest, a white rose petal at his side. Today, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth. He held up the blanche étoile petal, its delicate form a stark contrast to the gravity of his words. This petal, from Mademoiselle Laroche's private greenhouse, was no accident. It was placed to accuse or to mislead. The letter opener, stolen from a locked drawer, points to Monsieur le Comte. The blackmail notes, found in Beaumont's room, suggest motives for all. But the truth lies not in the clues themselves, but in their purpose. The Comte's voice was tight. "Get to the point, Monsieur Poirot. Who killed him?" Poirot's gaze turned to Sophie Laroche, whose eyes widened in terror. "Mademoiselle Laroche," he said, his tone gentle but relentless. "You are a genius with roses, but also with deception. It was you who killed Claude Beaumont." A gasp rippled through the group. Sophie's notebook fell to the ground, her voice a desperate cry. "No, that's absurd. I didn't—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Permit me to explain. Beaumont was a blackmailer, oui, but his true threat was to you. In his notebook, he wrote of your rose formula. SL, priceless. She'll pay to keep it. He knew your blanche étoile was not entirely your creation. You had taken it from a rival botanist, a secret that would ruin your career. When he demanded payment or exposure, you acted." Sophie's face crumpled, tears streaming. "He would have destroyed me," Poirot continued, his voice steady. "You planned with care. You knew Beaumont's habits, his late-night walks. You lured him to the labyrinth, where the dew would hide your footprints. You stole the Comte's letter opener from his study, perhaps during a visit to discuss the gardens, to cast suspicion on him. The blow was precise. No struggle, for Beaumont trusted you. And the petal? You placed it to suggest another's guilt, perhaps the Comtesse, whose past with Beaumont was known. But the petal betrayed you. It could only have come from your greenhouse." The Comtesse clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide. "But the letters, my letters." Poirot nodded. "Oui, madame, Beaumont used your past to extort you, but you were not the killer. Your fear was real, but your hands are clean. The Comte, too, was a victim of Beaumont's greed, but his pride kept him from murder. Lady Eleanor, your gossip fueled suspicion, but you lacked the precision for this crime." Lady Eleanor's smile vanished, her voice sharp. "You've no proof, Poirot." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The proof is in the pattern. The labyrinth, a place of confusion, was chosen to hide your tracks, Mademoiselle Laroche. The petal, unique to your greenhouse, was your mistake. You could not resist adding a flourish, perhaps to point to another, but it pointed to you." Sophie sank to her knees, sobbing. "He would have taken everything, my work, my life. I had no choice." Inspecteur Lefebvre stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting. "Mademoiselle Laroche, you will come with me." The Comte embraced his wife, relief softening his features. Lady Eleanor, for once, was silent, her eyes narrowed, but her tongue stilled. Hastings, stunned, turned to Poirot. "Good Lord, Poirot, how did you know? That petal, it was such a small thing." Poirot tapped his temple, his smile faint. "The little gray cells, Hastings. They see what the heart hides. The petal was no accident. It was the killer's signature, left in arrogance or error. As Sophie was led away, her sobs echoing through the gardens, the roses stood serene, their beauty untouched by the tragedy they had witnessed. The guests dispersed, their steps heavy on the gravel, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone at the labyrinth's edge. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, shaking his head, "you've done it again. But that labyrinth, it gave me the creeps. Why choose such a place?" Poirot's eyes lingered on the roses, their petals swaying in the breeze. "The labyrinth, Hastings, is a mirror of the human mind. Complex, deceptive, beautiful. The killer sought to hide within its twists, but the truth, it always finds a path." The Chateau de Versailles loomed behind them, its golden facade a silent guardian of secrets now laid bare. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache gleaming in the sunlight, and turned toward the chateau. "Come, Hastings. The roses will bloom again tomorrow, but for now, the little gray cells deserve a rest."